Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How about another game of Let's Pretend today? Let's pretend... now I'm really going to have to do some thinking about what the date is going to be. It's going to be Monday when we play this thing. October, I really have to check the calendar, 24th when we get back to this, because I'm recording well ahead of time, of course, predicting what the news is going to be over the weekend. No small feat, of course, and by that I mean no people with small feet are allowed to listen to this show. I don't know why I would choose to discriminate against you that way. It's a lie that I am going to. Don't worry about it, but I'm stuck with this joke now. I've begun it, and you know what? I'll abandon it. How about that? We'll never get around to it. If anybody has a great punchline for that, send it in. Use the KITM hashtag. Record it yourself. Send it over to me, and we'll see what we can make of this thing. All right. I have in mind a couple of stories that I want to share with you, or that I wanted to share with you way back when I actually recorded this thing. And presumably the asteroid has not hit the Earth this weekend, and it doesn't sound foolish to spend time on such fantastic stories as this one that I saw circulating on Twitter. And in fact, Scott Anderson sent along to me. He sent me the raw story report about this thing, although it comes originally from, where? Daily Beast. But as you know, of course, the Daily Beast makes it difficult to read a certain number of their stories after a while. I could have delivered this to you, in a couple of days when November rolls around, but thankfully, the need to wait is, obviated for us by the good folks at Raw Story, who have shared the story in their own format here. This, and I like the headline that Raw Story has supplied here, and so did Scott. Right-wing superhero movie ends, quote, in disaster after $1 million in funders' cash goes missing. This, according to a report, which they later let you know is in the Daily Beast. Will Sommer, having put that report together, would love to read it next month, but in the meantime, I've got this one. But it did strike me, as soon as I saw the headline, and Scott was sharing it, that this is kind of interesting. A right-wing superhero movie ends in disaster. I guess it's a disaster for the movie because it doesn't get made, maybe, because $1 million in funders' cash has gone missing. But in itself, this is a right-wing superhero success story. The superhero of the story, though, is the person who stole the $1 million in cash and got away with it, I guess, because they don't have that person in custody or even know who it is. The movie may be a disaster, but the story seems to be a success, at least for whoever embezzled this money. So congratulations to you. You are the new right-wing superhero, and we don't even know who you are, unless, of course, Will Sommer actually does, and it's revealed to us by Brad Reed summarizing the story over at Raw Story. Let's check into it. An attempt to make a Confederacy-promoting right-wing superhero movie has reportedly, quote, ended in disaster after $1 million in funders' money has gone completely missing, which, again, sounds like a complete success for somebody. The Daily Beast's Will Sommer reports that the planned movie, called Rebels Run, was based on a comic book character created by far-right blogger Vox Day, who is apparently hiding behind a fake name, that features a hero named Rebel, wow, who is sometimes depicted in a Confederate flag bustier. I guess it's either a cross-dressing or female character, and who fights against a global police force hunting down free-thinking conservatives. Yeah, that's exactly what they would, of course, be doing, and I guess that's this is supposed to be the character here. I don't know if I can identify the actress who's playing this role, but okay, now I understand why there's this weirdo picture here in illustrating the movie. Okay, the film's troubles, not the cinematic troubles, but the troubles of making the thing, started when Day, whose given name is Theodore Beale. And whose day? Does it even say? This is Vox Day, right? The far-right blogger. The film's trouble started when Day, the blogger, whose given name is Theodore Beale, decided to use a Utah-based firm called Ohana Capital Financial to hold the $1 million he'd raised in donations for the movie in escrow. Okay, I mean, a bank would probably work for that, but all right. Beale went with Ohana because it was a rare financial institution who would do business with him given his long history of unabashed racism and sexism. Okay. So he had problems to begin with. The trouble, as Sommer writes, is that Ohana appears to have been a sham institution set up by a con artist. What a great con that is. Oh, we'll do business with you when no one else will. And who will you run to when we... All right, run off with the money. Ohana was the creation of James Wolfgram, a self-described cryptocurrency billionaire, always trust them, who posted pictures of sports cars that supposedly belonged to him on social media, he writes. But in fact, according to a federal indictment filed last month, Wolfgram's wealth was a sham. How do you like that? That's amazing. The sports car pictures, for example, were pulled from other websites, which you can actually find out pretty easily if you do a little bit of searching, but whatever. Wolfgram's business also sold what were billed as high-tech cryptocurrency mining rigs, but those too were a hoax, according to prosecutors, with their screens just running on a loop to create the illusion of a mine. Sure, this is great. Day told disappointed supporters recently that their money had, in fact, gone missing while under Wolfgram's care. I wouldn't count on us getting the money back, said Day, who also baselessly claimed that the theft was part of a grander plot, quote, intended to break our community. And how sad that would be if we did break their community. All right, I mean, there's not much to it. I don't know how much more there might have been in Sommer's report. Maybe we'll find out next month. But anyway, that's the long and short of it, which is to say, I guess, if that's never going to be too long, didn't read, but you could just straight up say I didn't read it. And the story, I would encapsulate it as moron guy who doesn't know what he's doing raises somehow. I mean, congratulations to him for raising $1 million to make this movie. Although I bet that wasn't too hard because, people are stupid and they'll part with their money. Witness this guy who then raised the money. He's not that smart because he immediately put it in escrow with somebody who was a total scam artist, and the money's gone. So we do know who stole the money. It's James Wolfgram, and he's not in jail, so I guess it's a pretty big success story. And who knows where he ran off to. I don't know if he's still at large. Maybe he's living overseas somewhere, or maybe he'll just end up in jail, and it's not that great a success story. But what can I tell you? The market has spoken. James Wolfgram had the highest utility for that $1 million, and he took it and ran off with it. And shame on anybody who thought that it would be a genius idea to put money like that for safekeeping with a crypto scammer, but I guess he didn't think he was a scammer. And he also didn't have time in his life to check out whether or not those pictures of sports cars were in fact stolen from other websites. But you can do that in about 5 minutes. And, who's got 5 minutes if you've got $1 million burning a hole in your pocket, right? If you can raise $1 million, ordinarily, I would think you could find out if the people you're going to deposit it with are real. But because you didn't actually work for that money, you just ask other people to give it to you, well, gee whiz, you lost out. You're not a real person who does real work to earn money. You think you are because you had to ask very hard for people to give it to you, but that's not the same thing as working. So, sorry, you lose. Oh, I'm sure somewhere, I'm working very hard to get my trombone sound. There it is. Okay, what hard work that was. Feels like $1 million. Phew. Oh, what just occurred to me is that we don't really have to, technically, to be nice, we should wait until next month, I guess, or we should subscribe to the Daily Beast. That's probably the better idea. But Pocket offers us the opportunity to read the original Will Sommer piece and see if there's any more interesting tidbits in there. Let's jump in. The introduction is pretty much the same, right? An attempt to make a right-wing superhero movie, which is just dumb because, really, honestly, aren't all superhero movies pretty much right-wing fantasy anyway? Okay, but they're going to make another one, more right-wing than the others. And it has ended in disaster, $1 million missing in China, oh boy, and a participant facing a federal indictment. Now, is that participant also in China with the money? Or what? I don't know. I wouldn't count on us getting any of the money back. Theodore Beale, the right-wing blogger, far right-wing blogger, I think we should note, known as Vox Day, which I think comes through in that fake name, he admitted to his fans and investors in a video last week. This isn't how Beale's followers thought their investments would go in 2019 when they started contributing to fund a film based on a Confederacy-themed superhero comic book character created by Beale. Rebel was the name, but that's not where we were going with this. A trailer promoting the proposed movie, Rebel's Run, featured the character Rebel fighting a global police force hunting down free-thinking conservatives, which is a good idea, but not really happening yet. Frequent Tucker Carlson collaborator Scooter Downey, whoever that is, signed on to direct. Beale's supporters rapidly blew past an initial $750,000 fundraising goal, ultimately raising more than $1 million. And I guess none of it got to Scooter Downey yet, but maybe they did, in which case he's a suspect. That money was supposed to be held in escrow to secure several million more dollars in funding. 3 years later, though, the cash is gone, and with it, Beale's hopes for a movie. The Rebel's Run collapse stands as a cautionary tale for conservatives who dream of seeing their ideas turned into films, and comes as right-wing media outlets increasingly dabble in motion pictures. So, great opportunities to steal it all. Commentator Ben Shapiro's company had a streaming website that offers movies with a conservative tinge, brown tinge, by the way, in case you're wondering what tinge that is. You thought orange, but it's not. Including a thriller about a school shooting, oh boy, what a great topic, and a Western starring canceled actress Gina Carano. Earlier this year, Breitbart News distributed a Hunter Biden biopic, but Rebel's Run's collapse stands as a cautionary tale for conservatives, showing that the jump to movies isn't a risk-free endeavor. And it doesn't have anything to do with the fact that it's a movie. It's handling money, which is supposed to be a conservative's strong suit, but apparently is not, because they're super dumb. There was reason to think Beale and his fans could realize their dream of going from comic books to cinema, if only through sheer fanaticism. His devoted followers call him, oh God, quote, Supreme Dark Lord of the Evil Legion of Evil, which I guess is obviously some sort of joke upon itself, but still too dorky for me to say out loud without rolling my eyes, and describe themselves as his minions. Except they've lost millions, this minions. So anyway, Beale's supporters, who frequently complain about supposed progressive social justice warrior influence creeping into fields like video games and science fiction, had already funded a handful of comic book issues and stirred up a controversy at science fiction's premier awards. Beale's history of racism could have made it difficult for Rebel's Run, which stars a character sometimes depicted in a Confederate flag bustier, because really chiefly it's about seeing boobs more than about vindicating conservatism, I'm sure. Anyway, it would have, his racism, not the bustier, was apparently going to make it difficult to find traditional financing. Though it sounds pretty traditional as financing. And traditionally, this is what happens to idiots and their money, right? Fools and their money are traditionally soon parted. There you have it. I don't see what's non-traditional about this. He has claimed that certain races are more likely to commit violence. This is how racist he is. And called one of his foes in the science fiction dispute, whatever dispute that might be, a black author, a half-savage. Although he's probably still got the whole of his money, so who's got the last laugh here. Beale has affiliated himself with the Gamergate movement. I guess they think it's still a movement. Opposes women's suffrage, except for bustiers, and once described homosexuality as a birth defect. He's so funny and edgy. Given that track record, he instead turned to Utah-based Ohana Capital Financial, a business aimed at customers that would struggle to get money elsewhere. As Ohana's promotional materials put it, according to prosecutors, the firm offered banking to the unbankable. On November 5th, 2020, Beal transferred the $1 million to Ohana to be held in escrow in advance of future film funding. And by the way, there's no proof offered anywhere that a guy who's just an a-hole can't have a bank. I mean, I really doubt that a bank would say no. Yeah, I'm going to deposit $1 million. Well, you're a controversial guy. People will be angry at us for providing you banking services. Banks are full of a-holes. I mean, to be honest, right? Both the depositors and the people who work there, I don't think anybody's going to really find out or be able to do anything. I think this is part of the mystique. Well, we're unbankable because we're so crazy out there. We're such free thinkers that people won't hold our money for us. I think they will. Anyway, so like an idiot, you gave it to this guy and he ran away with it. So you're an idiot. Ohana was the creation of James Wolfgram, a self-described cryptocurrency billionaire who was lying, who posted pictures of sports cars that supposedly belonged to him on social media. And honestly, I mean, what could be better suited for something like this? I'm a billionaire. Are you sure? How do I know you're a billionaire? I have sports cars. Like, what else could you be buying maybe that might demonstrate your wealth? Or, I don't know, but sports cars it is. Rawr, I'm very sporty. Okay, so that's what he did. And guess what? In fact, according to this federal indictment filed last month, Wolfgram's wealth was a sham. The sports car pictures were pulled from other websites. Wolfgram's businesses also sold what were billed as high-tech cryptocurrency mining rigs. I think probably otherwise known as a computer with a giant fan on it that keeps it cool. Or, maybe a big server farm full of computer. I don't know. But those two were a hoax, according to prosecutors, with their screens just running on a loop to create the illusion of mining, I guess. And I don't know what it would look like. So anyway, unbeknownst to Beal and his supporters, the indictment alleges Wolfgram was deeply in debt to one of his business's other clients. That client had paid Ohana more than $4 million in September 2020, several months into the COVID-19 pandemic, as part of what was meant to be a payment to a Chinese manufacturer of personal protective equipment. Instead of carrying out the transaction, prosecutors allege, Wolfgram spent the millions on his own unrelated business issues, but not actually cars. So, okay. Now 7 figures in the hole and with no PPE to show for it, Wolfgram allegedly used the Rebels Run money to buy the Chinese medical equipment. Soon after that, according to a video Beal released to his fans, the blogger and his collaborators became suspicious and contacted the FBI, sparking the investigation into Wolfgram. Funnily enough, several years after that, it turns out that the FBI was a woke deep state enemy and was going to be no help to you whatsoever and was more likely to raid your house or Super President Donald Trump's house than actually help you. Ha ha ha. Now you got to defund the FBI and you're getting no help whatsoever. I wonder if he's joined the defund the FBI crowd. Wolfgram's attorney didn't respond to a request for comment. Beal declined to comment, citing the ongoing investigation. Wolfgram now faces 4 counts of wire fraud over the Rebels Run money and other aspects of his business. While the film's investors might someday recoup a portion of their money through the legal system, Beal has given up on funding his superhero movie. Beal claims, without evidence, of course, because what other way is there to claim anything in his world, that the alleged con was carried out to disrupt his right-wing fan base. I strongly suspect that this whole thing was a targeted operation intended to break our community, Beal said in the video he published last week. But who was he distributing the video to, if not his community? So I guess that's kind of dumb, too. Beal isn't done with movies yet, though. In a video to his fans, which he keeps producing despite having lost all his money, he told them he's working on a script starring his friend, anti-Semitic former comedian Owen Benjamin. In this new movie, Beal plans to cast Benjamin, who believes the moon landing was faked, as the head of NASA. So hilarious. And, I hope they continue to burn money. Why they would give it to the Chinese, I have no idea. It wasn't their idea to do that. But okay, now we know a little bit more, and I think he's a little bit dumber than I believed he was just a few minutes before, and that's an accomplishment. Switching gears for a moment, last week during the show, I think during our mention of what was happening with Alex Jones and his the tremendous jury verdict now entered against him and costing nearly $1 billion, got some notes on people who I guess had some either familiarity with bankruptcy itself or some angle of the story here. And let's see, at least the first of these, we got a note from Bosengood, who on Twitter, who let us know that, one, that the show was very enjoyable that day, talking about Jones owing so much money, but pointing out it's not so clear Jones can indefinitely use the bankruptcy of his company to avoid paying that big judgment, and includes a link here to a BloombergLaw.com article on the subject here on bankruptcy law. Alex Jones's $1 billion verdict puts focus on bankruptcy mediation. A deep dive offered up by, I don't know who. Where's the byline on this thing? They store it over on the side here. Oh, yeah, right. James Nani, Nani. I don't know how he pronounces that, but it's short, so maybe it's Nani. Okay. James can tell me at some point in the future, I'm sure. And he wrote back on October 14th, a $965 million jury verdict last week now, against InfoWars founder Alex Jones will considerably ramp up his and Sandy Hook shooting victim families' focus on using bankruptcy mediation to sort out available assets and payments. Few believe Jones has $1 billion in assets to pay for the defamation judgment levied against him and his bankrupt company, Free Speech Systems, for his lies that the 2012 elementary school shooting was a hoax. Jones and Free Speech, which owns the right-wing conspiracy site InfoWars, face another nearly $50 million in a judgment from another defamation case in Texas. As Jones uses Free Speech's Chapter 11 to limit liability, representatives for Jones and the company already have agreed to engage in mediation with victim families and a bankruptcy trustee investigating its finances. But the stakes in the court-supervised mediation, recently approved by a judge, just got a lot higher for all parties after the October 12th judgment from a Connecticut state court. Coming together to land a settlement may provide some monetary closure for the parties duking out in Free Speech's turbulent and controversial Chapter 11 case. I guess duking it out in it. The it is missing. Call the editor. But the talks will keep the spotlight bright on Jones's 10-digit liability that amounts to a breathtaking public censure and his indefatigable attempts to use bankruptcy law to evade the penalty due. It's an ennobling of his attempts, I wouldn't have used that word. A resolution that could be possibly achieved in a global mediation will avoid the delay and risk associated with Jones's likely appeal, said Deborah Grassgreen of Pachulski, Stang, Zeal, and Jones, LLP. Instead, this looks like it has been badly edited, but I guess she says that instead, I would think that this judgment would make the mediation more critical, Grassgreen said. And I don't know if that's cleared anything up for me, but complicating the process, if you can believe it's even more complicated, comes next. Still, mediation could drag on as there will likely be a long slog of information gathering over Jones's assets and how much, if any, can be used to pay creditors, said Donald L. Swanson, a bankruptcy attorney and shareholder at Coley Jessen. A quick resolution is a pie-in-the-sky something, he said. Is a pie in the sky? I might have said is pie in the sky, or is a pie in the sky fantasy, or something like that, but okay. Having trouble with this guy's writing style. Sorry. The large verdict gives the Sandy Hook victims' families increased leverage in the bankruptcy, but settling with Jones may still have benefits, said Nicholas Koffroth, a bankruptcy attorney with Fox Rothschild LLP. There's always the litigation reality that it's tough to shake someone down for $1 billion, Koffroth said. Free speech's case was always destined to run a turbulent course with heightened public scrutiny on Jones's actions, questions of assets, whereabouts, and layers of corporate entities that exposed deep family ties to the company's operations. The sheer magnitude of this verdict will be an impediment to a consensual plan or reorganization, said Melanie Siganowski, a former bankruptcy judge, now with the law firm Otterborg PC. Next up, the dischargeability question. Jones is personally liable for the damages, but he, quote, is not contemplating any personal bankruptcy. His attorney, Shelby Jordan of Jordan and Ortiz PC, told Bloomberg Law on Thursday. Jones told his listeners of his InfoWars talk show on Thursday he plans to appeal the Texas and Connecticut cases. He also said he's, quote, out of money. Jones would likely face the same hurdles over dischargeability in personal bankruptcy as his company faces in its business bankruptcy, Alan Rosenberg of Markowitz, Ringel, Trusty, and Hartog, PA, said. Half of this article is law firm names. If Jones provides victim families full and complete disclosures of his financial wherewithal, and thus how much he can actually afford to pay, perhaps they can settle at mediation, Rosenberg said. Very few people have the liquidity necessary to satisfy such a substantial debt, Rosenberg said. While Jones hasn't sought personal bankruptcy, his attorney previously asked that free speech extend to Jones the automatic litigation stay afforded debtors, according to bankruptcy court documents filed by Free Speech's former co-counsels Kyung S. Lee and R.J. Shannon of Shannon and Lee LLP. Not only is half of this article the names of the law firms where these people work, the other half of it is jargon that's never really explained. Hopefully this makes some sense to some of you. A looming question over the free speech system's bankruptcy is whether damages stemming out of defamation judgments can be discharged. If a judge finds the verdict can't be discharged, that could have a dramatic effect on whether the debtor is able to successfully navigate and then exit the bankruptcy process, said Rosenberg. Fourth Circuit precedent allows a bankruptcy court to prevent a small business debtor from discharging debts incurred through willful and malicious injury, Signowski said. However, Free Speech Systems' case is in Texas. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, which includes Texas, has not addressed the matter. There's also a question of whether willful and malicious injury can be proven since the Connecticut judgment didn't result from a trial on the merits, Grassgreen said. Instead, Jones was found liable for defamation under default judgment after he failed to respond to discovery. I guess that's a wrinkle. Some courts have held a bankruptcy court can honor the pre-bankruptcy judgment without retrying the elements of willful and malicious injury, even if it was not litigated to trial on the merits, Grassgreen said. Well, okay. You know what? That's left me with more questions about exactly what the hell this is about than, more questions than I ever even really had about these things. But at least I can understand this much. It's interesting and a wrinkle given that, all right, well, he is personally liable for these things, but a corporation alleges to have ownership of the show, which is, of course, his source of income. But, of course, he won't be protected from personal liability by any by any legal doctrine that they could transfer the liability to the company because he was acting willfully to cause, as I said, malicious injury, and that's not something the company would normally assume liability for. That would remain personal to him. And but of course he hasn't got $1 billion, so they go to mediation, and the question of who they're negotiating with and to what extent you would be willing to settle with somebody who is a shady character is another question. There was also A couple of tweets that are still lingering on the KITM hashtag from Matthew Rigdon, who said no N, and not until the end of the name. I don't know why I inserted it there, but Matthew we've heard from a number of times before, and I guess he's got some experience with it, or at least, he shares this nonetheless. Chapter 11 is usually filed by corporations and businesses, but can be filed by individuals. My mother filed Chapter 11, I guess, at some point. She was a farmer, lots of valuable assets, but little cash flow. Okay, we can understand that situation. There are, very few attorneys, I guess, who handle Chapter 11, so it's very expensive. Is that right? I don't know. I don't know much about bankruptcy law, but I keep hearing, Chapter 11 comes up all the time, and I'm not certain why that is, but that's sort of like offhand, the one chapter I feel like I hear an awful lot about. But okay, I can certainly understand why the attorneys who handle it are expensive. So very expensive. In some large cities, there may be only one firm. There's only one in Fort Worth, I guess. From personal experience, I can say his attorneys are billing him 5 figures a month. And that can't be comfortable. Fun fact, bankruptcy filings are public, so anyone can log into Pacer and read Jones's filings. That should be fun. When he's finally discharged, which doesn't mean he's paid everything, his attorneys will have to disclose how much they're owed. I bet it's at least $250,000. Okay. Well, that's something to look forward to. And I guess we'll have to learn a little bit about bankruptcy law to come to understand exactly how much Alex Jones is suffering, because I'll really want to know at any given time how much hurt is really going on over there. Here's something that seems certain to offer a very interesting story. I have this, and it's been sitting in pocket just a little while, from NBC News under the headline of How a Woman Infiltrated the Proud Boys. That seems interesting all by itself, but many layers to what makes this story interesting. And let's see what we've got here. Women are opposing extremists online, it says in the subheader, and in the field in a variety of roles, including infiltration, at great risk to their own safety and against forces that want to kill them. And they're not kidding about that. Proud Boys say they want to kill everybody, and they probably pose a greater threat and might even take additional joy in killing a woman that infiltrated them more than any of their other enemies. This comes from Andy Campbell, who is the author of the book We Are Proud Boys, and this piece is itself adapted from the book We Are Proud Boys, How a Right-Wing Street Gang Ushered in a New Era of American Extremism, by the self-same Andy Campbell. And here we go. The House's January 6th committee concluded its final public hearing this week. That would, of course, now be last week. But the fallout of the Capitol riot is far from over. Indeed, leaders of the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys extremist groups face seditious conspiracy charges over what the Justice Department believes is an outsized role in the planning and execution of the insurrection. But while law enforcement is still attempting to unravel what happened on January 6, 2021, there have long been brave and anonymous activists and researchers, many of them women, working to counter these extremist groups from the inside. On November 14, 2020, following a day of violent demonstrations among Trump supporters in Washington, D.C., for the Million MAGA March, as they called it, familiar clashes broke out as Proud Boys attacked anti-fascist demonstrators outside Harry's Bar, their favorite local haunt. In an interview with me, one of the anti-fascists, a woman who supports medics in the field at demonstrations, recalled a harrowing scene in which a group of Proud Boys had her crew cornered and outnumbered when one of them lunged at her. And here, offered up in italics, I guess, is her story. The Proud Boys started spraying something into the crowd. I had my respirator on, so I wasn't affected, but one girl near me got it directly in the eyes. So I'm looking at the medics, trying to get her some attention, but there wasn't much room. Usually, if you're trying to treat someone in the field, you try to take them to a safer spot, but at that point, there was no safer spot. So we were in a corner. Our shield line had been doing a fairly okay job up to that point of trying to keep the Proud Boys separated from the rest of the group, but they got overwhelmed. The shield line ended up breaking, and that's when they started charging into the crowd. I looked at the medics and I was like, we have to move this person. We have no choice. We have to go. As we started trying to move, that's when a Proud Boy, who had to have had more than 100 pounds and a foot of height on me, grabbed me and held me. He punched my arm, or at least that's what I thought, that he was punching me. And 15 minutes later, after my adrenaline settled a bit, I realized he'd actually stabbed me. She broke away and ran before he could land more blows. She wrapped the wound, but didn't immediately go to the hospital until another medic, whom she described as a combat veteran, took a look. He said, "You don't have an option. That needs stitches. Go to the hospital," which I was severely in denial of at that time. She showed me pictures of the gash in her arm. The knife had gone deep, well past her muscle tissue. It required stitches and weeks' worth of sobbing pain to heal. She never did file a police report or speak openly to the press, saying she feared what officers and other Proud Boys might do with her identifying information if they found out she was anti-fascist. These concerns are paramount for all anti-fascist activists, but especially among women fighting back against misogynist groups like the Proud Boys. One often overlooked facet about anti-fascist action is that it involves the work of a lot of women, both online and in the street, though it's not often clear due to the anonymity requirements inherent in the job. Though there are still issues with misogyny and inequality within leftist protest movements, these women tell me it hasn't stopped them from embedding in every single facet of anti-fascist activism. Women are opposing extremists online and in the field in a variety of roles, including infiltration, at great risk to their own safety against forces that want to kill them. Ashley, an anti-fascist activist from the New York tri-state area, has infiltrated the Proud Boys. She's not a member. The gang vehemently rejects women in its ranks, but she has inserted herself into a group of women who follow the Proud Boys to bars and rallies, which she describes as a kind of roving fan club that reveres the gang for their patriotism and the protection they offer from Antifa. She didn't join them to admire the gang, but to record as much as she could from the Proud Boys' side of rallies and at their planning meetings to send back to her comrades. "I wanted to keep the people that I love safe," she said. She described herself politically as a Democrat-turned-anarchist, one who never voted until she cast a ballot against Trump during his re-election campaign in 2020. The threat posed by Trump and the far-right groups around him was so great, she said, that she got into anti-fascist work to directly oppose them. She went to counter-demonstrations in Black Bloc, where she said she faced down extremists in the street. But she always had her eye on infiltration work, which she said was dominated by men. "I wanted to prove that women could be just as impactful and effective as men in that space," Ashley said. "I wanted to open the door for other women and encourage them to step up and push to the front if they have to, Riot Girl style." Okay. She got her chance at a bar in New York State during a night out with her activist friends. They set their sights on a crowd of Proud Boys in uniform at the bar, and Ashley made her move to get closer to them. By striking up a conversation and flirting a bit, she said. That's all it took. She exchanged numbers with the member, and soon enough, she was getting invites to Proud Boys events where women were allowed, and which usually meant bars that were friendly to the gang, or the very back of marches and rallies where women were expected to stay throughout the day. They told us that physical combat is not a place for women, and you know what? That's a great break. Take it. That's what she said. And there was a lot of very patronizing, "we're here to protect you" kind of language. It was frustrating to be sidelined because Ashley was there to get dirt on the Proud Boys, but she took the opportunity to get to know some of the women on the outskirts of the movement. To blend in among them, Ashley said she had to create a character for herself, whom she described as a bubbly, over-the-top, quote, idiot, drenched in spray tan. As she told me this, she pitched her voice upward and added a very heavy dose of vocal fry to the degree where her tone would have been a danger to crystal wine glass. I'm not going to tell you her real name, but let's just call my character Candy, she said with a giggle. She's really effing annoying. She's absolutely obsessed with former Trump advisor Kim Guilfoyle, who is like a total style icon. And she's just really friendly and ditzy and really just wants to get out there and hold a flag and support the troops, which of course they're not, but you know, for our purposes or their purposes anyway, I guess they consider themselves troops. The character worked, she said, but not because it was convincing to the other women. They could see right through the act. They were probably participating in it in some way on their own. But anyway, that wasn't a danger to Ashley's cover because they were all playing it up in the same way. See? To impress members of the Proud Boys. That's what it takes to be a ditz who'll do anything. Okay. She said her character was the stereotype for the Proud Boys' perfect woman, willing to dumb herself down below their level, a difficult task, Ashley argued, and be subservient with an understanding that misogyny was baked into the rules, like McInnes's venerate the housewife mantra. What's interesting about the dynamic between the men and women in that space, she said, is that nobody ever seemed to make it past flirting, despite the fact that the women were there to, quote, get a Proud Boy boyfriend. The groups were segregated most of the time, and women could get close to the Proud Boys who caught their eye by acting as their beer maids, walking to and from the bar with booze for the opportunity to strike up a conversation. But she never saw a situation where any of them won each other's affections. Even if that did happen, she said most of the Proud Boys were too hammered by the end of the day to get out a sentence, much less an eloquent pickup line, if they even knew any, I would guess. This was all fine and dandy for her because she never had to worry about fending off anyone's advances. The boys generally stuck with the boys and the girls with the girls. When she was able to attend the rallies, she was constantly recording video and audio. She recorded fights between the Proud Boys and anti-fascists, initiation ceremonies, speeches, and marching orders, all on a burner phone, and sent them back to her activist community. She showed me several of them. She had new angles on various Proud Boy moments in recent history, including a shot of the gang burning a Black Lives Matter flag outside a historic black church in Washington, D.C. on December 12th, 2020. And they did, in fact, get in legal trouble for that one, didn't they? Ultimately, she said, the surveillance was the most impactful work she was doing. The Proud Boys were a threat to not just her anti-fascist community, but the national one, and she wanted evidence of their violence and their plots. The job came with some scary moments. She witnessed several fights she wishes she could have intervened in, but couldn't, either because her cover would have been blown or because the Proud Boys wouldn't have let her anywhere near them. But getting photographic evidence was paramount. If someone was stabbed, I wanted to get it on camera. If some of these Proud Boys were planning serious high-level attacks, or if they were drunk and they were going to give me information that could help my friends live, I wanted to make that happen, she said. So that's it. Just a brief excerpt from the book, but one I thought that was interesting and important, and a reminder of who's doing the hard work of compiling evidence against the Proud Boys, because very often the police, for some strange reason, don't have any tremendous interest in actually getting that. So thanks to activists like the pseudonymous, I guess, Ashley, for the work that they're doing, and all the people who are doing all that work online, specifically those sedition hunters who are getting more and more of these people identified, charged, convicted, and put away for their role on January 6th. Kudos to all. And kudos, too, to Steve Satig, our frequent correspondent, back with another recorded segment after it's been a little while, I think, since we heard from him. But this one, well-timed, at least well-timed to help me get out the door for the weekend anyway. Let's have Steve take it away with the interesting article that caught his eye just in the last couple of days.
Good morning, David. This is Stephen Satig. I've sent in recordings to you before and found an article that I thought you might be interested in. And for your listeners, from the Los Angeles Times of October 19th, 2022, by Debbie Trong and Gabriel San Roman, entitled, After OC School District Bans Critical Race Theory, It Faces Cal State Fullerton Backlash. As some background, back in April, an Orange County school board voted to ban CRT teaching in its school district. So that was back in April. This story came out yesterday. Months after an Orange County school district banned teaching critical race theory, Cal State Fullerton had told school officials it is pausing placement of its student teachers in the system's K-12 classrooms, citing concerns that the district policies conflict with university goals that promote equity and inclusion in education. Leaders in the university's College of Education, among the biggest providers of teachers into the county's public schools, told officials in the Placentia Yorba Linda Unified School District that they did not believe the district would be able to support its student teachers whose training is rooted in diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice, and tenets of critical race theory, according to a statement from Lisa Kurtman, Dean of the College of Education and the college's leadership. Clinical practicums, fieldwork, and student teaching are major components of effective teacher preparation, the statement said. It is critical that we place teacher candidates in districts that support their growth and development. The college is open to working with the district to provide learning experiences that value freedom of thought and expression for the diverse student population. Kurtman declined to comment. In an email, a university spokesperson said the situation is still unfolding. 6 student teachers from Cal State Fullerton are working in the Placentia Yorba Linda School District this academic year, down from the 70 or 80 teachers that have typically been placed in the system. In a message to families, District Superintendent Michael Matthews said leaders in CSUF's College of Education asked the district over the summer about its commitment to, quote, providing a just, equitable, and inclusive education, end quote, after the school board narrowly approved a measure in April banning the teaching of critical race theory. The resolution, which passed 3-2, encourages culturally relevant instruction and states the district, quote, values all students and promotes equity and equality, end quote. But it also says the district will, quote, not allow the use of critical race theory as a framework to guide such efforts, end quote, and that, quote, other similar frameworks, end quote, cannot be used to guide teachings on race. Cal State Fullerton sent a letter to the 24,300 student district at the time, discouraging the move, according to a school board member who read a portion of the letter at a public meeting. Another school board member read aloud another part of the letter in which the university said it is proud its students, quote, come to you with the education to effectively explain and include CRT, as well as ethnic studies in their classrooms, end quote. School board member Marilyn Anderson said the university statement bolstered her support of the resolution banning critical race theory, saying, quote, it is important to pass because our teachers are coming into our district learning these principles and how to incorporate them in a K-12 setting. That is not imagination, end quote. It is not clear whether educators in the Placentia Yorba Linda district have ever taught lessons on critical race theory, a university-level academic framework that seeks to examine how racial inequality and racism are embedded in legal systems, policies, and institutions in America. But Republican activists and lawmakers have denigrated the academic theory in recent years as part of their drive to restrict how race and racism are taught in public schools. School board member Leandra Blades, a key supporter of the district's critical race theory ban, said Cal State Fullerton's decision validates her April vote. Quote, I look forward to seeing what colleges and universities we can partner with in the coming months, end quote, Blades said in a statement. Quote, the only students being harmed by this political stance are the student teachers at CSUF, end quote. In his message to families, Matthews said the school district assured the college it would provide a, quote, just, equitable, and inclusive education for all students, end quote. Continuing the quote, "We are disappointed by their decision to pause the placement of new student teachers in our district," he said. "We value our partnership with CSUF, and we look forward to continuing the discussion about renewing their placement of student teachers in PYL-USD. Teacher candidates at Cal State Fullerton participate in 150 hours of field work during their first semester of student teaching and 450 hours during the second semester, according to the college's website. The university partners with 14 school districts to place student teachers. Linda Mannion, president of the Association of Placentia Linda Educators, an alliance that represents 1,100 educators, said many new hires in the district graduate from Cal State Fullerton. She worries the district will lose out on prospective teachers in the midst of a national teachers shortage. Quote, "Cal State Fullerton is our lifeblood. They really are a lifeline for our district," she said. "When we don't have that pipeline of new teachers coming in, those teachers are going to go to other districts around us." End quote. Other colleges in the area place student teachers in Placentia Yorba Linda, but most come from Cal State Fullerton, Mannion said. In a statement, the Placentia Yorba Linda Unified School District said Cal State Fullerton is the only university to halt student teacher placements in the system. Quote, "Our school district now has a larger capacity to accept student teacher placement requests from other universities," the statement said. "We appreciate the opportunity to meet and train high-quality teachers." End quote. Some teachers and parents in the district worry that the lack of extra help from student teachers will harm classrooms at a time when many students are focusing on academic recovery and need extra attention. One teacher who spoke on condition of anonymity for fear of political backlash said teachers are already stretched thin and the removal of student teachers increases their workload. Student teachers typically spend a couple of weeks observing a classroom before transitioning to running the classroom under the guidance of a regular teacher. Quote, "I was supposed to get a student teacher this semester, but I didn't," the teacher said. "Now we can't teach the teachers of tomorrow." Alex Siemens, a parent of 2 high school students in the district, said his daughter benefited from having 2 Cal State Fullerton student teachers in her orchestra class last year. "It has a direct impact on the ability to teach kids in our district," he said, adding he views the decision by Cal State Fullerton as a censure of the ban on critical race theory in the district. Quote, "The outcome of what happened is hurting kids, teachers, student teachers." Critical race theory remains a key issue in next month's school board elections. Carrie Buck and Karen Freeman, the 2 board members who voted against the April resolution, are up for re-election. Their challengers are opposed to critical race theory and are endorsed by the Republican Party of Orange County and 2 other school board members. That's the end of the story, David. I hope this is something you can use.
Well, I teased you with this one at some point last week, and so now I feel obligated to bring you the Rolling Stone piece, again, mentioned just a few days ago, inside the Jerry Falwell love triangle. Yes, you're going to have to go inside the Jerry Falwell love triangle. Pool boy tells all. I think we all have some recollection of that story when that broke and destroyed the leadership of Liberty University to the extent that that ever mattered. Anyway, this a piece written, I guess, co-written by Giancarlo Granda, who I guess is the pool boy in question, along with Mark Ebner, again in Rolling Stone. And it reads here in the subheader, in an exclusive excerpt from his new book, Giancarlo Granda has his own book out now, and he didn't wait 5 years, just 1 or 2. But that's how long it took to write, and it's fine. It wasn't. I don't know if there's any new information that we'll all wish we knew about Jerry Falwell a long time ago. I think we probably wish we don't know what's going to be revealed in here now, but I'm forcing you to listen. So, in the new book, Giancarlo Granda reveals how he fell into a scandalous relationship with the evangelical leader and his wife. I think he was more or less mugged into it, but hey, let's see what he has to say. Now, parenthetically, or rather, there's a parenthetical remark here as well, but also in italics up at the top, there's this note. Before the events related in this excerpt, Giancarlo Granda was just another 20-year-old Miami high school graduate, pool attendant at an iconic Miami Beach hotel, eager to please, ambitious and open to suggestion. A chance poolside encounter with Becky and then Jerry Falwell Jr., firstborn son of an evangelical legend, and his attractive 40-ish wife intrigued him. He acted on a lark and was suddenly in the middle of a complex sexual affair with Becky, which is spelled with an I, by the way, at the end. The affair gave Granda a first-hand view of immense wealth, unexpurgated power, and unwavering faith, as well as the duplicity and destruction it takes to maintain their illusion. How interesting. The Falwells, it notes parenthetically and also in italics, have denied, and that's underlined, denied Granda's account and insist that Jerry was not a participant in the affair. It was all kept secret from him, I'm sure. Now, I just want to reemphasize for you here that the word denied then is in parentheses, in italics, and underlined. That must mean it's very important for some reason. There's a number of circles and arrows on the back of each page as well. At any rate, a decade later, the italics continue, it all looks very different. Oh, so maybe he did wait several years to write the book. Okay. Their predatory nature, abuse of power, complete lack of moral compass, and monumental hypocrisy is breathtaking to look back across the full sweep of it. In this excerpt from their new book, Off the Deep End, Jerry and Becky Falwell and the Collapse of an Evangelical Dynasty for those of you listening in Liz Truss land, co-authors Giancarlo Granda and Mark Ebner recount how those first few tentative steps set Granda on a dizzying path to near destruction. Very dramatic. At the tail end of the high season, at the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami, on March 13th, 2012, I was close to ending my shift at around 4 p.m. when I noticed a woman staring at me. She was camped out in my section, maybe in her mid-40s, attractive, fit, and very charismatic, stretched out on one of the poolside day beds in a bikini. Day beds are way more comfortable than the lounge chairs, and the going rate was $150 a day, so anyone with a day bed already had my attention. I didn't even realize. My goodness. Her dark brown eyes locked onto me, and I felt her watching me wherever I went. She had a deep, penetrating stare, and when she caught my eye, she didn't look away. It was a little disconcerting. The next time I was within earshot, she said, "Oh, these girls don't know what they're doing. You need someone older." She was being flirty, saying is it a joke, so I flirted back. She asked my name, and when I shook her hand, she complimented me on my handshake. Ooh, okay. We talked for a few minutes. Do you go to school? What kind of stuff are you interested in? And then I told her I had to get back to work. Every time I cycled through, there was a little more banter and a little more flirtation. She said her name was Becky. It all seemed innocent enough, but then near the end of my shift, she asked me to sit down next to her on the daybed, where nobody could hear us, and in a conspiratorial tone asked me, "Hey, do you want to come back to my room?" Not what I was expecting. When I didn't say no right away, she added, "There's just one thing. My husband wants to watch." Hi! Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, there was a lot to unpack in that sentence. A sexy rendezvous was about to happen, but wait, she's married. But no, her husband's okay with it, and in fact, he's coming along to have a look. That was too many hairpin turns, and the resulting whiplash made me a little queasy. She knew it was shocking, and there was a slight catch in her voice when she said it. I must have recoiled ever so slightly. Not just a major one? Okay. Because she was quick to add, "Oh, don't worry. He'll hide in the corner and watch us. That's his thing. You won't even know he's there." It's even more disconcerting somehow. Although, maybe, quite honestly, there's no getting around it. Okay. By way of explanation, she said that she and her husband had visited Miami Velvet, a local swingers club in Doral. Oh, hey, Trump has a club in Doral, too, doesn't he? That's interesting. Anyway, a lot of swingers stayed at the Fontainebleau, so Miami Velvet was well known to all of us who worked there. She confessed they had been curious about these sorts of places, having had no experience with them, but it was all gross, nothing sensual or erotic about it. People having faceless mechanical sex everywhere you looked, so they laughed. All I really knew about Miami Velvet was that it served as a punchline for the locals. I had never known anyone who had actually been there, and I had a sense that it was for an older age group. But now the conversation was charged with sex, and I wanted her to stay on topic. I was conflicted. On the one hand, she was in her bikini, touching her neck, fussing with her hair, paying me compliments, sipping on her drink while she stared into my eyes. I found it all very intriguing, but it was also weird and unlike anything I'd ever done before. Oh, sure. Sure, guy, sure. Anyway, okay. I asked her if we could meet up alone first, but she said that would go against their agreement. I told her I needed some time to think about it and asked her to call me after my shift, which ended in another hour. She typed my number into her phone. She didn't give me hers. I had seen her surreptitiously taking pictures of me in between chatting me up, and I surmised that she must have been texting her husband the whole time. Later, after she sent me a batch of the photos, I realized that at least one of them was taken from outside my section, which means she would have had to have moved into my section, which I suppose makes it a surveillance photo. Soon after, her husband came down and joined us, and she introduced him as Jerry. He wore Speedo briefs, with his belly hanging over his waistband, also, Anyway, it was a little awkward, and he largely avoided eye contact, but he shook my hand and said, "Nice to meet you, John," with his thick southern accent. He pronounced John like John, and this became his nickname for me as long as I knew him. Some of my coworkers and at least one manager could see what was going on, and they encouraged me to go for it. Well, that's Miami for you. We all agreed it was strange, but also hilarious. And also maybe his manager is also 20-something. I don't know. When Jerry left, he told me he'd see me later. He sure would. In the parking lot, my cell buzzed and the number came up as blocked. It was Becky. She had mentioned that they were staying in a suite in the Tresor Tower. I don't know what that is, but okay. Which is in between $1,000 and $1,500 a night. I know what that means. So while I didn't know who they were, they obviously had money. Still, they suggested we meet at a Days Inn around the corner from the Fontainebleau so we could avoid any issues with hotel management if anybody recognized me. Why don't you bring me to this Tresor Tower place? With traffic, it took me an hour to get home to my parents' house, shower, change into jeans and a black t-shirt, and then half an hour to get back. I called my sister on my way home and told her what was happening, including what hotel we would be at, in case Becky and Jerry turned out to be serial killers. She thought the whole thing was hysterical. I think that's weird in itself. She was in her late 20s at this point and a confidant and best friend, so she knew all about my dating life, if you can call this a date. She asked me, "Do you think this is a good idea?" laughing as she said it. I told her, probably not, but then you're only 20 once. Unless you lie a lot. I arrived at the Days Inn, around 8:30 or 9 p.m. Becky was sitting on a couch in the lobby. I was nervous, and I guess she was too, because she poured whiskey from a fifth of Jack Daniels into a plastic cup. This is high class, isn't it? She wore nightclub attire, a tight dress that finished at mid-thigh, not see-through, but suggestive, and black heels. We passed the cup back and forth between us to calm our nerves. At one point, she said, "I can't believe we're going to do this. This is crazy." At the time, I had the impression that they had never done this before, but a decade later, I think that's highly unlikely. Regardless, we made small talk as she lightly stroked my arms and inner thigh. I rested my hand on her leg, and soon we were comfortable enough with each other that she told me, "All right, let's go upstairs." On the elevator up, she backed up against me, and I folded my arms around her. I followed her into a clean, generic room with 2 queen-size beds. Jerry lay on the one closest to the door, dressed but with his jeans unbuttoned and fanned open so you could see his underwear. Terrific. Shoes off, with his shirt sleeves rolled up to the elbows. It was awkward at first, but he was already drunk, and he greeted me with, "Hey, John," and then let out a giggle. That was a little disconcerting, but it also served to break the ice since it added to the absurdity. He had a drink, which he kept sipping while we talked. I told him, "If you get jealous at any point, just let me know, and I'll get the hell out of here. I will not hesitate." I was still worried that he might attack me and stove me in the back of the head. Stove? What? Stove in the back of my head. I don't know if I've ever heard it put that way. Might attack me and stove in the back of my head. Okay. But he told me, "Don't worry about it. You guys do what you want to do." I kissed Becky, and she was practically vibrating. I wish they hadn't told me that. I picked her up and carried her over to the second bed. She was surprisingly light. She wasn't wearing any panties, which is the kind of thing that makes an impression on you at 20, and she half whispered, "Our rule is anything but intercourse," meaning no penetration. Boy, this is a good morning story, isn't it? I nodded. That was fine. Okay, and, they had some fun. I don't know that it really has to be censored, but I mean, you can get the idea of what's going on. They take some turns. It doesn't really necessarily have to be discussed. These are Falwells, after all. I don't need to, preserve their dignity. I'm trying to preserve my own. At some point, Jerry got up and walked to the side of the bed to get a better angle. I had a moment of near panic, thinking, what is he doing? And I told him to back off. Not in a hostile way, just establishing some boundaries. That's interesting. Bold of you. He apologized and quickly walked back toward the entrance and stood right outside the bathroom. After that, I was able to put blinders on and block him out. Becky rarely lost eye contact with me, but for all her forwardness, she seemed submissive in the moment, eager to please. Afterward, they were elated that we'd managed to pull it off. She was buzzing, electric, and Jerry continued to giggle with excitement. I was happy, but this was enough pathfinding for one day. I told them, all right, guys, I'm out of here. Becky kissed me on the lips and then walked me down to the lobby. As I drove home, I was pretty sure I'd never hear from them again. Good, I hope I never hear from them again either. Anyway, the next day, my cell phone rang as I was walking across campus. I picked up to hear Becky's voice. Hey, what's up? She said. You want to see me again before I leave? I paused, then thought, why not? Oh, and I'll tell you what, thankfully enough, that's actually the end of this thing. Although, quite honestly, now that I'm looking back on it, I wouldn't say it was terribly revealing. It doesn't tell us anything about how he fell into the whole business relationship alongside us. I mean, there's no mystery to this. He meets someone he finds sexually interesting and attractive. She offers to have sex with him, and he says, sure. And then, but my husband wants to watch. Okay. Then he does. Okay. I don't know. I mentioned the story. I promised the story. I should have read it beforehand, although I certainly couldn't have read it twice. And now you know more than you ever wanted to know about that. I think the big takeaway here is Speedos on Jerry Falwell Jr. And that's probably the best image you can take away from this thing. Wow. Okay. Well, who knew? Okay, how about we get more serious and focused again? I have a Mother Jones, from Rolling Stone to Mother Jones here, with what looks to be a relatively long read, and I don't know, could take us the rest of the day. Let's see. This is, it caught my eye, intrigued me. How the left lost faith in SCOTUS. I think we all know how we lost faith. And learned to love packing the court. Which brought me to mind of the effort that we had to make in order to, let's say, help the left learn to love getting rid of the filibuster, because it wasn't entirely obvious that that needed to happen when we first started. And of course, lots of people thought it was impossible to do. And I was just wondering whether there was any similar parallels between, moving the left to that position and to that understanding of the filibuster, and doing the same with packing the court. Because, of course, like changing the filibuster rules, we were taught that that was either, if not impossible, then that we had all learned from history that that was just not something to fool around with because of the way that it came out during the Roosevelt administration. So I'm just interested to find out how we learned this. Let's see. Subheader here reads, Climate, Abortion, LGBTQ, and Gun Control Groups Want to Expand the Court Before It's Too Late. Pima Levy is the writer of this October 14th piece. And let's see what she has to say. On the spring day last year, when the Supreme Court announced it would hear a direct challenge to Roe v. Wade, Sarah Lipton-Lubet, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing the name correctly, Lipton, easy enough, L-U-B-E-T, Lipton-Lubet, I don't know, French? Sorry, Sarah. She knew immediately how the case would end. The court, stacked with 6 conservative justices, would kill the right to abortion. a veteran reproductive rights advocate and lawyer who was consulting for multiple reproductive rights groups at the time, her realization was followed by another: she'd need a new job. She'd spent the better part of 2 decades fighting for abortion access, relying on a backbone of judicial decisions that upheld reproductive rights, and on the premise of a Supreme Court that would uphold these precedents. But that wasn't going to cut it anymore. It's an interesting thought. Simply trying to move around the pieces on the playing field that existed was not going to treat this like the crisis that it was, the crisis that it is now. Instead of rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, she needed to plug the hole and right the ship. About 2 months later, she became executive director of Take Back the Court. This is an advocacy group that since 2018 has been leading the movement to add 4 justices to the Supreme Court and dethrone the conservative majority that now controls it. Not unlike the coalition that was thrown together to try and work on filibuster reform. Sounds familiar. With the legal precedent central to her previous work now dead, Lipton-Lubet is fighting to change the makeup of the court before every other progressive priority goes the way of Roe. I've never felt more hopeful about my work, she says. The movement to reform the Supreme Court is gaining momentum and credibility at a rapid pace, in large part because of people like Lipton-Lubet. And by the way, I used the fact that I was recording this ahead of time to go and check on the pronunciation, something I've always hoped that I'd have the opportunity to do. And I just took the name and went to YouTube and say, let me see how she gets it pronounced when she's being interviewed. And by the way, I came upon her, looks like a major panel at Netroots Nation this year in Pittsburgh, the 2022 Netroots Nation, and they must have had a big panel on Roe and I don't know what else, the other activism that surrounds it. But there she was, and she pronounced her own thing. It was the Friday keynote, as a matter of fact, I see now. And she tells us what her name is, and it's Sarah Lipton-Lubet with a T on the end, pronounced. Latasha Brown and Emma Hernandez are also on the stage with her for this thing, but I confess I haven't had a chance to watch the whole thing. I just watched enough to get the pronunciation right. I felt I could at least give time to that. Now, where were we? Yes, we had just pronounced her name. So, the movement to reform the Supreme Court gaining momentum and credibility at a rapid pace, in large part because of people like Lipton-Lubet, advocates for progressive causes who watched the ascension of Trump-appointed justices to ill-gotten seats on the bench and have now concluded that their life's work can never be realized if the Supreme Court's current conservative majority remains in power. Staring down the court's new term, which began last week, reform feels even more urgent. The court stands poised to allow more pollution of America's water, to end affirmative action in college admissions, to give businesses the right to discriminate against LGBTQ people, and to greenlight gerrymandering schemes that disempower people of color. And that's just the big cases in the term's first 3 months. This is worse than a nightmare for the left, as SCOTUS blog founder Tom Goldstein explained in July, because, quote, you wake up from a nightmare and it's over at some point. But this court's rulings will shape American life for the next quarter century. I think that's underestimating it. Once considered both practically impossible and political suicide, there are now roughly 63 members of Congress who've sponsored legislation to expand the court, with several more behind legislation to impose term limits on the justices. Under pressure from the left, President Joe Biden summoned a commission to study Supreme Court reform, including court expansion, something inconceivable just a few years ago. It really is very much like the starting point of filibuster reform in that sense. Except for the commission, of course. On the heels of the High Court's decision to undo abortion rights this summer, advocacy groups focused on reproductive rights, LGBTQ rights, gun control, environmental issues, and climate change have all, for the first time, begun advocating for added justices. And they had some practice because we pulled them out of their individual silos to work on filibuster reform, telling them before we were able to see the disaster looming in the court that they would get nowhere on the legislative side so long as the filibuster stood in the way of all of their agenda items. All this has also made the American public skeptical about the court's current setup. Polls show the court's credibility at an all-time low. And while advocates, lawmakers, and academics on the left are debating how exactly to fix the court, two ideas are quickly becoming a consensus: that upending the Supreme Court's current structure is essential to the future of American democracy, and that the window to pull this off is up against a running clock. The Supreme Court is poised to reshape voting rules to make it harder for Democrats at all levels of government to win elections in 2024 and beyond. As the movement for reform works to win enough support in Congress, the possibility of a Republican takeover would postpone their project for years to come. The court is only becoming more radical, only becoming more unhinged, says Lipton Lubit. The real question is just how long is this going to take until we act, and how many people are going to be hurt in the interim that wouldn't have had to be if we had acted faster. The story of how modern Supreme Court reform went mainstream began in 2016 when progressives watched as Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell blocked the confirmation of Obama nominee Merrick Garland, citing a made-up rule that Supreme Court candidates should not be confirmed in a presidential election year. Over the next 2 years, McConnell ended the 60-vote requirement, known as the filibuster, not quite exactly, but you get the idea, to confirm Supreme Court justices, to push through the nominations of first Neil Gorsuch and then Brett Kavanaugh. In 2018, two veteran Democratic staffers, Obama White House alum Chris Kang and ex-Hillary Clinton campaign staffer Brian Fallon, founded Demand Justice to fight Trump's judicial nominees. 2 months after Kavanaugh's confirmation, Demand Justice expanded its mission to include adding 4 justices to the Supreme Court. Around the same time, on the other side of the country, political scientist and activist Aaron Belkin founded Take Back the Court. Belkin, who spent a decade turning public opinion against Don't Ask, Don't Tell, devised a savvy strategy to put Supreme Court expansion in the spotlight, make it an issue in the 2020 Democratic primary. When an activist affiliated with the group landed a question about adding justices at a Pete Buttigieg town hall, Buttigieg expressed openness to the idea. In some ways, it's no more a shattering of norms than what's already been done to get the judiciary to where it is today, the candidate said. Quite so. With one candidate now open to expanding the court, the media posed the same question to others. Good strategy there. By the way, take note, propelling the question of court reform into the headlines. Within weeks, the tally of presidential candidates open to court expansion reached 5. Then, days before the 2020 election, McConnell and Senate Republicans defied the precedent of their own creation to fill the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's seat with conservative Amy Coney Barrett. This was their paramount achievement after years of norm-breaking maneuvers that secured 3 seats in 4 years on the courts for GOP, or as we say, GOP-backed justices, and a 6-3 conservative majority unseen since the 1930s. That'd be your Lochner court that you sometimes hear, Federalist Society types brag about, or pine for, I guess I should say. Democrats had now won the popular vote in 7 of the last 8 presidential elections, but appointed just 3 of the court's 9 justices. Does that count number 7, the Biden one? Because we hadn't won that one yet, but okay, we went on to do so. And that has come up also in the filibuster context a couple of times. So, I'm glad people are keeping track of that. And yeah, by the way, if they really had stuck to their principle, which was never real, of no confirmations, no Supreme Court confirmations during an election year, especially only a couple of weeks ahead of an election, just think about the fact that Amy Coney Barrett's seat would now be occupied by another nominee from Joe Biden sitting alongside Justice Jackson now. It might even have been Jackson at that time. But, okay, just wanted to point that out. The American people didn't consent to a right-wing Supreme Court supermajority, says Lipton Lubet. There's just this absolute chasm between the Republican stranglehold of the court and where people are in this country. The first full year of the 6-3 majority's reign displayed their eagerness to enact the far-right agenda. In June, the conservative justices overturned Roe v. Wade, and Justice Clarence Thomas, in a concurrence, warned that the right to contraception, same-sex marriage, and some forms of sexual relations are next on the chopping block. Ordinarily, you hear that in dissent. Oh my God, the logical extension of this is to go here, and nobody wants that, right? Clarence Thomas says, I don't care whether people want it or not. I'm hoping to take it there. I want this to happen. As mass shootings and gun crime rocked the country, the court made it harder to regulate guns. Audaciously, the conservative justices mischaracterized the facts in one case to allow public prayer, or prayer in public schools, rather. The liberals' dissent included photographic proof of their deception. As climate disasters wreaked havoc worldwide, the court began to dismantle the federal government's ability to fight climate change, and these were only the most sensational conservative victories. After all this, Republicans' norm-breaking court takeover, and then the most norm-breaking Supreme Court term in recent memory, progressive policy advocates, the American public, and dozens of lawmakers on Capitol Hill have come to see the Supreme Court, or rather to see Supreme Court reform, as the only way out. Over the last year, 60 House Democrats have signed on to the Judiciary Act of 2021 to expand the court by 4 seats, including Representatives Adam Schiff of California and Jerry Connolly of Virginia, who are close to the Democratic leadership. The Congressional Progressive Caucus, with nearly 100 members, endorsed the bill, though it has not yet been scheduled for a hearing. Not unlike Merrick Garland, I would point out. In August, 5 Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee introduced the Terms Act to impose term limits on the justices, with 2 similar bills already proposed in the House. I don't think they bother going through what terms is an acronym for, but oh boy, I can't wait to find out. Multiple groups, including the left-leaning Center for American Progress and the ACLU, consider this reform idea less radical and more attainable than adding justices, because it would affect all justices equally, and, at least in the past, has been endorsed by Republican colleagues Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, who will quickly drop it, of course, if it means supporting a Democratic bill. Increasingly, Democratic candidates are embracing the idea of reforming the court because it is popular among Democratic voters. How nice. This summer, the New York Times asked 11 of the state's Democratic candidates for Congress if they supported expanding the court. All but one said yes. Last month, a Marquette Law School poll found that Americans are evenly split on the question of adding justices, with 51% in favor and 49% opposed. Good, we win. Hooray. Nearly 3/4 of Democrats now support the idea, as do 51% of independents. Term limits are even more popular. A July poll found that more than 2/3 of Americans, including majorities of both Democrats and Republicans, support them. When the Dobbs decision leaked, that was a watershed moment in letting us all know that the court is no longer an apolitical body, says Christine Kippens, Deputy Legal Director for Policy at Lambda Legal, which has helped secure major wins for LGBTQ rights at the Supreme Court, including the 2015 case that legalized same-sex marriage nationwide. In July, Lambda Legal joined 3 other LGBTQ legal rights groups in calling for Supreme Court expansion. This is a bold move because, as litigating groups, they risk angering the justices before whom they regularly bring cases. Their support is a signal that they have given up on this court. That is interesting, too. But who would it anger, too? I mean, it's an interesting thing to note that it would anger justices, and they would say, why are you, seeking to undermine my power? I'm not. We love justices and their power. We want more of them. What's the problem? I don't know. But it'd be interesting to find out exactly who would be angered by it and why, and whether there would be any people that we would consider allies of only the 3 people on the court that we would still consider allies, I guess, and whether it bothers them. I'd be interested in finding out. I don't doubt that it's the case, at least in some instances. At any rate, let's see. The League of Conservation Voters a leading environmental group, announced their support for expansion in June and has thrown itself into the effort to persuade Congress to act by lobbying on Capitol Hill and educating state-based affiliates and supporters through its voter education programs. Again, not at all dissimilar to how we educated on the filibuster. LCV joined Unrig the Courts, a coalition of the most active pro-court expansion proponents, where they coordinate and strategize their efforts. Same thing. LCV has come to view democracy advocacy as one of its core issues, alongside environmental concerns since Trump's election. We were about 10 years ahead of that. And it's become clear that their group will struggle to advance their environmental goals as long as the Supreme Court bench looks like it does today. This really is a blueprint left over from filibuster advocacy. These are lifetime appointments, says Doug Lindener, LCV's advocacy director for the judiciary and democracy. If we don't act, they're going to be in power on this court and attacking our environment, our democracy, and civil rights for the rest of our lives, and so we are in it for the long haul. In June, two gun safety groups, Newtown Action Alliance and Guns Down America, also joined the call for adding justices to the bench after the court issued a ruling that makes it harder for states to limit who can carry a concealed gun. The support of issue-based advocacy groups for Supreme Court expansion continues to multiply, says Kang, as they come to see the current court as an existential threat. Now these same organizations have understood, well, the only way to enact my agenda is to get rid of the filibuster first. Hi, how you doing? The only way to protect my agenda is to reform the Supreme Court, Kang says. So this has to be a complete theory of change from beginning to end. At Demand Justice, Kang and his team are working to explain this theory of change to the entire progressive movement. Well, we did some work on that. And then those people retired because we're very old now. So I guess the education program has to begin anew. By the way, I'm available. Give me a call. I mean, I'm not really all that available. Afternoons, you got it. Anyway, Demand Justice directly lobbies members of Congress, but Kang says he's particularly proud of the group's organizing work, in which they educate local activists from around the country and then bring them to Congress to lobby their own representatives to support the Judiciary Act of 2021 to add 4 justices. We had one meeting where a member of Congress actually showed up to the meeting itself and said, you know what, you're right, I'm going to join the bill, he recalled. We think that this is the kind of real organizing from the bottom up that's necessary, not to build, but to prove the movement that has currently, prove the movement that currently exists for Supreme Court expansion. Lipton Lubit says Take Back the Court has an email list that has reached over 70,000 activists whom they ask to help raise awareness about court expansion through specific actions and advocacy with their representatives. But most of the group's work is behind the scenes. In the first half of 2022, the group met with 50 congressional offices. They also work with progressive and grassroots groups to explain how this court will trample their priorities unless it is expanded. Lipton Lubit counts 130 groups that have joined in calling for court expansion since Take Back the Court was founded. The more I read about this, the more I expect to see Darcy Berner's name pop up in this somehow, although I don't know if she's in this biz anymore. But boy, did she write the book on this or what? I mean, well, maybe we cribbed this book from somebody before us too. That's entirely possible. It's a pretty solid plan. In May, for example, 11 state-based reproductive rights organizations together announced their support for court expansion after Lipton Lubit persuaded them that reforming the court is key to the future success of their work. Did I skip a sentence here? I may have done that. Mentioning that, now, did I get all these? I don't know. But Lipton Lubit counts 130 groups that have joined in calling for court expansion since Take Back the Court was founded. That was an important number. I wanted to go back and get that in there. Now, jumping back forward again, right, in May, for example, 11 state-based reproductive rights organizations together announced their support for expansion after Lipton Lubit persuaded them that reforming the court is key to their future success. Her in-depth engagement with state-based reproductive rights groups allowed us to think differently about the role of the reproductive health rights and justice movement in democracy reform, says Rebecca Hart Holder, the executive director of Massachusetts-based Reproductive Equity Now, one of the groups that signed on to the call for adding seats to the High Court. This Supreme Court term, one case in particular, presents the opportunity for a blatant GOP power grab in Moore versus Harper. The Supreme Court is expected to breathe life into a fringe right-wing legal theory to give Republican-controlled state legislatures nearly unlimited power over the administration of federal elections, unchecked by state constitutions and courts, even possibly the governor. If the conservative majority embraces this theory, called the independent state legislature doctrine, to fancy it up, congressional maps will become more gerrymandered, and voter suppression efforts in federal elections could keep voters from the polls, making it harder for Democrats to win, and violating the constitutional right to a Republican government, I would add. But not everyone will see it that way. No Republicans, anyway. A broad ruling by the court could even allow state legislatures to bend presidential election results to their will. The doomed attempts at election hijacking in 2020, in which GOP-controlled legislatures tried to deny Biden's victory by selecting slates of fake Trump electors. By the way, I should point out, no legislatures actually did that. They were being prevailed upon to do that, but nobody actually did it. Not that they wouldn't try it this time. They were just caught unprepared and flat-footed and were knock-kneed about it, thankfully. But they may not be so scared to do it next time, especially if this theory gets endorsed. This court is serving the political interests and ideological goals of the Republican Party outside of the law, says Lindner. Those who want to reform the court argue that the Supreme Court wasn't supposed to be this way. The country's founders famously feared the dominance of political parties, so they certainly didn't want one party to take over the Supreme Court. And they likely did not envision a Supreme Court deciding every major question in American life. The Supreme Court, in its current form, has much more power than was initially envisioned, says Ryan Dorfler, a Harvard Law professor. At the time of the founding, the Supreme Court was expected to use the power of judicial review, invalidating acts of Congress, only in cases of flagrant, unambiguous unconstitutionality, Dorfler explains. Further, the court was supposed to be the subject to congressional regulation, which the Constitution explicitly grants. And it is. It's just they don't use it very often. With this in mind, some pro-court reform academics argue that the final arbiter of the Constitution is meant to be the people, acting through their elected representatives, not the justices. After the Dred Scott decision in 1857 deprived black Americans of citizenship and expanded slavery, as Harvard Law School professors Nicholas Bowie and Daphne Rainon recently recounted in The Atlantic, Abraham Lincoln and the Republicans campaigned against allowing Dred Scott to stand. Once in office, Lincoln and the Republicans added a Supreme Court justice to decrease the power of the South on the court. If the policy of the government upon vital questions affecting the whole people is to be irrevocably fixed by decisions of the Supreme Court, Lincoln said in his first inaugural address, then the people will have ceased to be their own rulers, having to that extent practically resigned their government into the hands of that eminent tribunal, though it wasn't very eminent, of course. Over the last year, as the movement for reform has grown, a handful of progressive law professors have begun to proselytize a point akin to Lincoln's, that not only is our current deference to the Supreme Court not rooted in the Constitution, but it also conscripts the American people to control by an institution that has never lived up to the ideal of pure apolitical fairness. Not that we have any institution that does, but at least some of them are openly political. Throughout America's history, this cohort argues, the Supreme Court's record has been undemocratic and non-egalitarian. It upheld the fugitive slave law of 1850 and deprived black people of citizenship in Dred Scott. After the Civil War, the court took a hatchet to new civil rights laws and hollowed out the 14th and 15th Amendments, allowing segregation and black disenfranchisement. As the financial recession of the 1890s morphed into the Gilded Age of inequality and exploitation, the court came down on the side of corporations and against protections like child labor laws. In the 1930s, the Supreme Court began to dismantle the New Deal, President Franklin Roosevelt's response to the Great Depression. To save his agenda, Roosevelt determined to pack the court. His court packing plan, and it's interesting that they use that terminology when it's expansion everywhere else, but okay, we remember from history court packing was a derogatory term for it, but his plan prompted major losses for his party in the 1938 midterms, but then aren't you supposed to have losses in the midterms anyway, and yada yada. I guess nobody used that excuse then. But the court heeded FDR's warning and stopped overturning New Deal programs. But for more than 4 decades now, the court has again privileged the rich and powerful while chipping away at the gains of the civil rights era. Under Chief Justice John Roberts, the court has allowed unlimited outside spending in elections, kneecapped unions, and rolled back voting rights protections, changes to American democracy that once again privilege rich and white Americans, combining that into right, over anyone else. The exception to this history is the mid-20th century, when the Supreme Court finally repudiated the Jim Crow systems it had helped entrench and handed down multiple important civil rights and pro-democracy rulings. Roosevelt's appointments, as well as those of Truman and Eisenhower, moderated the court. Thanks to this era, liberals in the last 50 years came to rely on the court as the vindicator of minority rights. Groups like the ACLU and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund used the courts to advance civil rights and and won, training the left to view the court, not the elected branches, view the court, as the guardian against oppression, and propagating the ideal of an impartial judiciary that rises above the political fray. And I would say, yeah, that's a good point. It's actually probably the exception rather than the rule. In Kang's telling, this is when the left and the right diverged. The left bought into the myth of an apolitical judiciary, just as the right, angered by the court's support for civil rights and abortion access, decided to capture the court and bend it to its political will. So the left disarmed itself and the right captured the courts, culminating in Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation a week before the 2020 election. I was part of the same legal elite culture that convinced myself that holding the line on an apolitical judiciary would strengthen our courts, he told the Presidential Commission on Supreme Court Reform last year. I am here to admit that I was wrong. To Kang and Lipton Lubit, the court's apolitical sheen is a dangerous myth, lulling liberals into complacency. Wipe away this gloss, and court expansion becomes the obvious remedy to the court's rightward lurch. It's immediate, and it's indisputably constitutional. Congress changed the size of the court 6 times before 1870, including 3 times between 1863 and 1869, in order to keep the court out of the hands of Southerners sympathetic to slavery. But some reform advocates say that court expansion is not enough. A small group of academics argue that it is a temporary fix to a bigger problem for American democracy, ceding political power to a court that will always, in the end, support the powerful over the vulnerable. The ideal would not be to have a rerun of the last century where we get control of the courts only to see them captured by our enemies and used against us, says Yale legal historian Samuel Moyne. That's what happened to the liberals in the 20th century, and why redo it? Last fall, Dorfler and Moyne argued in a California Law Review article that changing the court's makeup was a superficial reform to an institution that is structurally antithetical to progress because it's made up of unelected and unaccountable elites. Arguably, the court has often opposed minority rights because, until recently, it has been a white male court, generally far removed from the experiences of most Americans. They argued that instead the court should be disempowered through jurisdiction stripping, Congress limiting the scope of what the court can review. That's certainly available to them as well, and perfectly constitutional. This could be done comprehensively in one bill, or piecemeal through attachments to individual bills. For example, multiple House Democrats have called on congressional leaders to add such a clause to the Women's Health Protection Act to reinstate abortion rights. If the bill passes with a jurisdiction stripping clause in place, the Supreme Court would be powerless to strike it down unless the court defied Congress and did so anyway, resulting in a constitutional crisis. This piecemeal approach, if added to multiple bills in the coming years, could be the most immediate, if gradual, way to diminish the court's authority. Its appeal to its proponents is that it redistributes power from the court to the elected branches of government, which Dorfler and Moyne argue have demonstrated more dedication to political equality throughout the country's history, while the court has always returned to its oligarchic roots. Between expansion, term limits, and the jurisdiction stripping, advocates have options that are firmly rooted in the Constitution, but the feasibility of reform in the coming years will disappear if Republicans take control of Congress in this year's midterm elections or the presidency in 2 years. If Republicans win control of Congress or the White House, it will be in part because the Supreme Court intentionally and illegitimately helped them do so, Lipton Lubit says, referring to the court's many election-related rulings. Left unchanged, the court will continue to uproot the legal foundations of modern life, and it also disempowers the party that may one day decide to rein them in, as it also disempowers. Okay. Important slip up there. Finally, we'll do everything we can to educate lawmakers and the public about that reality, because the more people understand that the Supreme Court is little more than a legal department of the Republican National Committee, the more clear the need for reform will be. And we have reached the end and gotten it all in there. Here's another piece, the headline of which intrigued me as I saw it being passed around on Twitter the other day. The Political Culture of Lying, a Substack entry from Stephen Beschloss, whose name I hope I'm also pronouncing correctly, and this time I won't. I'm getting close to the end here. I think I'm tired of checking on pronunciations, but I'm sorry to Stephen if we've got it wrong. The Political Culture of Lying. Trump has fueled it, the subheader reads, but plenty of others are more than willing to accept and emulate this expanding culture. Good point. Let's see what he has to say here. I don't like liars, which makes the political world particularly dispiriting these days. It's not like this hasn't always been a problem. The long-held notion that politicians equate to liars is not an accident. The need to attract voters leads them to make pledges they don't keep, like Marco Rubio, make themselves look better than they really are, and frequently make their opponents appear more broken and dangerous than what's true. But we are witnessing lying on a scale that I have never seen, fueled especially by a man who is untethered from the world of facts and principles, incapable of experiencing shame, desperate for money and power, and determined to employ bullying, threats, and other violent incitements to get and keep what he wants. Donald Trump's cult followers, more than happy to ignore facts to sustain the trance, are quick to dismiss sustained criticism of their hero as Trump derangement syndrome. But the danger of this current and burgeoning dilemma is how the constant bombardment of big and small lies has dulled people's capacity to know what is true, normalized this reality so it barely registers, and convinced so many others to pursue their worst selves with the assumption that they will not face consequences for their lies. Recall, he says parenthetically, that the Washington Post tallied over 30,000, quote, untruths during Trump's 4 years in office, and 60% of Republicans continue to believe the 2020 election was stolen, down only slightly after 8 televised hearings of the January 6th House Select Committee. This topic was reignited for me after surveying Donald Trump's response to the unanimous vote of the January 6th committee to subpoena him, which I will specifically address in a moment. But it got me thinking about a whole host of others who are convinced that lying on a major scale is the path to victory, including Vladimir Putin asserting that Russia is invading Ukraine to root out Nazis, the Supreme Court nominees swearing that they recognize Roe v. Wade as settled law in order to secure their lifetime seats on the bench, and hundreds of election deniers now on the ballot continuing to insist the 2020 election was stolen. As much as each of these examples makes clear that these perpetrators don't care about the will of the people in their quest to take and keep power, the deeper problem is their assumption that lying is an acceptable mode of action, despite such profound consequences. While I'm not suggesting that the autocrat Putin and Justices Kavanaugh, Barrett, and Gorsuch were directly emulating Trump, I don't doubt that they are well aware of the increasingly permissive political climate for lying. Why not if it works? Why not if they won't be held accountable? As for the vast collection of election deniers, a likely mix of true believers and those who have cynically grasped that this is a way to grab attention and stay in the game, we'll learn in 3 weeks whether sufficient majorities of midterm voters are all in on the big lie as the past and future of American politics. It's up to Democratic turnout to prove that dishonesty is not the best policy, whether the topic is the 2020 election and election fraud, overturning Roe and banning abortion, or defending democracy. This week, last week, on Wednesday, Trump will, and now was, be required to give a deposition after a Manhattan district judge, Lewis Kaplan, refused Trump's gambit for another delay in the defamation lawsuit of E. Jean Carroll, a longtime advice columnist for Elle magazine. Carroll alleges, of course, Trump raped her in the dressing room of a Manhattan Bergdorf Goodman store in the mid-1990s. A charge which Trump not only denied, but appallingly dodged by insisting that Carroll is, quote, not my type. He then repeated that ugly comment last week in writing, while insisting the accusations are, quote, a hoax and a lie, and the case proves the legal system is a, quote, broken disgrace. I wouldn't bet that the pathological liar will be telling the truth this week, or that he did last week, which we assume that he did not. The question may be, how many times will he say he doesn't recall? And how many times will he take the fifth, despite his own question back in 2016, quote, if you are innocent, why are you taking the Fifth Amendment? These days, he's claiming this is what he must do because he's become the target of so many unfounded, politically motivated cases. In other words, repeated ad nauseum, witch hunts. But it's Trump's response to the January 6th committee that serves up the latest and most egregious demonstration of his refusal to face facts and his determination to continue dragging a majority of Republicans down into his swamp of lies. How did he begin his 14-page screed addressed to the Select Committee Chairman Benny Thompson? In all caps, of course, the presidential election of 2020 was rigged and stolen. The fraud is the crime of the century. The protesters concerned American citizens and great American patriots, and the committee members engaged in a witch hunt of the highest level, even though they are suffering very poor television ratings. Following his scrawled signature are a series of photos showcasing the large crowds on January 6th and a list of thoroughly debunked, quote, evidence from 5 states that he lost. I can't wait for the day when it is no longer necessary to pay attention to this man, but as long as he's at large and able to continue spreading his lies, he continues to poison the body politic by convincing his followers to believe that up is down, down is up, Joe Biden is not the real president, and he really won states like Michigan and cities like predominantly black Detroit were rife with cheating. As long as he continues to spread these lies, even if disproven over and over, his cult followers won't make the effort to confirm what's true and what isn't. As the Washington Post's Philip Bump reminds, Trump knows that producing page after page of election fraud will be just as effective as producing page after page of actual evidence. The sense of wrongdoing is all he needs. At the risk of repetition, allow me to conclude with this. I don't like liars. I really don't like liars who are more than willing to bring down the whole country in order to avoid the truth that they lost. And I really, really don't like those who know better, but who are too cowardly, ambitious, or both, and will continue spreading the toxic culture of lying long after the former White House occupant has left this earth. And that can't happen too soon, I might add. Pretty interesting. Well put. Thanks again, Steve Betchloss, for that entry today. Well, that leaves us time, perhaps, for just one more story that I think we can fit in here, let's say, lower scale that they're working on here. Lower scale of importance, perhaps, in some sense, but, dishonesty and, what should we say? Tyrannical abuse of the power of government anywhere is of concern. And this really highlights how the culture of lying and intimidation and bullying filters down from Trump to lower levels here. This, a story from out of Missouri, and reported here by the Missouri Independent. Attempted intimidation, the title says. Missouri AG sent 5 requests for MSU emails and records. What's going on here? In Tessa Weinberg's piece for the Missouri Independent, the subheader reads, Missouri Attorney General Eric Schmidt, his office said a request for a professor's emails was, quote, part of a fact-finding process. The professor said it felt like attempted intimidation for criticisms of Schmidt on social media. I think it's something we have to keep an eye out on and see what's up, so we'll put it on record for you. John Turner isn't shy about sharing his opinion. An associate professor at Missouri State University in Springfield, Turner's personal social media is typically filled with articles he shares about education or about his research focus of 4-day school weeks. But occasionally, Turner dips into politics, especially after Attorney General Eric Schmidt began suing, subpoenaing, and investigating public schools. In April, after Schmidt launched a platform for parents to report divisive curriculum, quote-unquote divisive, in their students' school, Turner mused on Twitter that Schmidt used to be known as a moderate in the state legislature. Now, as our Attorney General, he is so anti-teacher, those words in caps, I just can't wrap my mind around the flip-flop, wrote Turner, a former school administrator and teacher for 25 years. I'm working to make sure this dangerous, hateful, political jellyfish never gets elected to anything again. Well, a few days after that tweet, Missouri State University got a letter from the Attorney General's office requesting all of Turner's emails over the previous 3 months. Like he needed to email somebody to find out whether or not he liked or disliked this politician. I mean, I don't know what he hoped to find out. It was just intimidation. Didn't need anything. Contacted about the request for Turner's emails last week by the Independent, Chris Newell, N-U-E-L-L-E, a spokesman for Schmidt, said it was, quote, a part of a fact-finding process we undertook that was looking into the practices and policies of education in our state. That's as vague as it could possibly be, but I guess hoping to pass some sort of legal muster somehow. Turner says his research, which focuses on challenges facing rural schools and the 4-day school week, isn't something the Attorney General's office would be concerned with. I have no idea if Eric Schmidt even knows who I am, Turner said. As he reflected a bit more, Turner said he has come to believe the request for his emails was spurred by his public criticism of Schmidt, who is running as the Republican nominee for U.S. Senate, by the way, in case you didn't know, because I didn't even keep track of what's going on in Missouri. It's one of several states that, should be on the radar and just aren't. My attention is elsewhere. I perceived it as a shot across my bow to say, hey, buddy, we're watching you, and you are on our radar. And so I took it as an attempted intimidation factor, Turner said. But I will say that it probably had the exact opposite impact, and that I've probably been even much more vocal in my concern about the Attorney General politicizing his position. The request for Turner's email was just one of 5 open records requests that Schmidt's office sent to Missouri State University since the start of the year, according to records obtained by the Independent under sunshine laws. Requests filed in late March and April sought professors' emails and documents related to a Facing Racism Institute training for Springfield Public Schools and communications with the district, and administrators' emails that had no keywords associated with the Missouri School Boards Association, as well as correspondence with NICSA school board members and materials related to a Department of Homeland Security grant awarded to the university that aims to protect against radicalization to white supremacy. A spokeswoman for MSU said the university had no comment about the Attorney General's requests. The requests to MSU came months ahead of 2 highly criticized open records requests Schmidt's office sent to the University of Missouri, one for professors' emails related to a journalism course on fact-checking, and another targeting a research program that helps teachers implement social-emotional learning in their classrooms. Of course, they think they're rooting out CRT there. Next up, Schmidt's Education Lawsuits is the subtitle of this piece, this section here. Some of the requests appear to dovetail with ongoing lawsuits the Attorney General's office is pursuing, although Newell declined to comment on the scope of the requests. In 2 requests focused on the Facing Racism Institute, Justin Smith, Schmidt's chief of staff, asked for a litany of records, including emails, training materials, and a debrief document following a training the Institute facilitated for Springfield Public Schools in 2019. Schmidt sued the Springfield Public Schools last year. What a nice guy. Alleging the district didn't turn over records related to the training. A spokesman for Springfield Public Schools declined comment, citing the ongoing litigation. Asked about the office's request seeking documents related to the Department of Homeland Security grant, Newell referenced to the Springfield News Leader, an ongoing federal lawsuit against the Biden administration and social media companies alleging collusion to censor certain topics. Definitely what the Missouri AG needs to be involved in. The additional records requests, that sought emails from Turner and Brent Dunn, Missouri State University's vice president for university advancement, were later revised to include certain keywords like Missouri School Board Association, another entity Schmidt's office has sued over alleged sunshine law violations. On Monday, a Boone County Circuit Court judge granted the association's motion to dismiss the case. A separate but similar lawsuit filed against the Missouri School Boards Association by a conservative Georgia legal nonprofit was also dismissed in late August. The request for Dunn's emails also specifically asked for any correspondence between March and early April between 6 current and former NICSA school board members. Dunn, who also serves on the NICSA school board, declined to comment and said communications related to his duties on the school board now run through the NICSA public schools system. The keywords that Schmidt's office used in its revised request were puzzling, Turner said, because the only organization listed that he remains involved with is the Missouri Association of Rural Education. And that search term was also ultimately removed due to the volume of records it produced. The remaining records, which included keywords like Missouri School Board Association and Missouri National Education Association, produced fewer than 100 results in a preliminary search. Turner said after his emails were provided to Schmidt's office, he never heard anything about the request again. He wonders if Schmidt's office has done anything with his emails after receiving them. In his 3 decades as an educator, Turner said he always felt that every elected official, regardless of party, was an ally for public education and saw it as a public good. But in recent years, he said it feels like politicians are only interested in their next office. And that's the part that is just most disappointing and stunning to me. He said, I just can't imagine how we've gotten that far. That isn't necessarily the note I would have ended on, by the way, but it's a good point nonetheless. But yeah, to me, the stronger takeaway from all that is emulation of, if not Donald Trump tactics, then certainly Ron DeSantis tactics. But Ron DeSantis derives his tactics from Trump, and Eric Schmidt appears to be deriving his tactics from Ron DeSantis, making direct attacks against professors, universities in the state, etc., threatening their funding, hitting them with annoying and harassing lawsuits and records requests, and attempting to intimidate individual professors who may have commented in public in a negative way about that particular politician. Very insidious, and we need to watch out for that spreading wherever it might go. And to that end, I thought I might bring this to your attention so that you could police it where it's happening, whether it's in your state, a neighboring state, or across the country.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show with David Waldman.
Thanks for listening once again to one of our pre-recorded shows. Today being Monday, we are back Tuesday and hope to have Joan Carter with us to rejoin you for our live programming for the balance of the week. See you then.